I'm Hafsah Aneela Bashir, and I'm a poet, playwright, and performer, and I'm based in Manchester. And I'm about to call a poet that I've never spoken to before, who's all the way in Kansas, USA. I've only met her poetry so far, but I'll be chatting to her for the first time ever, trying to include all the P words that we can muster. And to say that I'm excited is an understatement. So please, can you connect us now? Oh,
Hi, Salam. Finally, we get to see each other.
I know. I feel like this is like a Nagar ceremony, where suddenly we're unveiled to each other. And in fact,
Are you pleased?
I am very pleased, Aisha. Very pleased.
Likewise.
It's so lovely.
Our
Because
parents made a good choice.
they did, and now we're bound for life across these 4,000 miles. No, it's so lovely to actually meet you and see you properly. And I'd like to just take this moment to tell people how we virtually met, or how I met your poetry first.
Yeah.
So I've been doing these Insta lives on my Instagram account at RedWiz1, and every day I come on at 2:30 and I read a short story and the work of two poets. And I came across your poetry in this anthology, Halal If You Hear Me, and I fell in love with your work. The poem that I found was Why I Can Dance Down a Soul Train Line in Public and Still Be Muslim. And that last line, my Islam just has to be, stayed with me. And so I tagged you in that post. I then invited listeners to send in haikus, which you generously sent some. And they worked as panaceas being passed back and forth amongst listeners, bringing comfort. And here we are at this festival in my house. And it's such a pleasure to have you as a guest in my house to be part of this conversation where we're going to try and get as many P words in as possible.
Thank you so much for having me. It just speaks to the power of social media and also that anthology, because if that anthology had not come out, then perhaps we would have never crossed paths and through poetry, but more importantly, the power of poetry. So
Yeah.
I'm really I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, this is someone from London and Britain, and they've taken interest in my work. And that was very, very just kind of mind blowing.
And the thing is, it wasn't just me that took an interest. I can't tell you how many people loved that poem. And that's what I find fascinating, that poetry has no borders, and it connects so many people, especially at this time, in this time of great entroublement.
Yeah, I think it's almost kind of like a universal language, because there's something about verse that I think allows people to enter and engage without a sense of feeling like there's a thesis statement that it must be made that they have to kind of figure out. And I know some people find poetry to be intimidating, but I think in these times it can be kind of a refuge against having to do work and all of the crazy things that are happening currently.
Can I read your bio out so everybody knows how wonderful you are?
Sure.
So Aisha and I had to ask Aisha to send me a voice note. Aisha is a Cave Canem fellow who resides in Shawnee, Kansas, a suburb that borders Kansas City, Missouri. As an African-American Muslim woman, her work explores how racial, gender, and religious identities align, separate, and blend. Her poem, Vanna White Reconsiders Her Pact with Her Gin, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize in 2019. And Why I Can Dance Down a Soul Train Line and Still Be Muslim was nominated in 2015. Aisha's poetry has also appeared in journals like Rattle, Callaloo, and Crab Orchard Review. Aisha teaches English at Metropolitan Community College in Kansas City, Missouri. She is married to David Mohammed and is the mother of two wonderful daughters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. And I wanted to ask you, how have you been in this pandemic?
Oh, it's been a roller coaster ride, and I actually don't like roller coasters.
I used to when I was younger. I don't know what's happened.
Yeah, I've never liked roller coasters. I think maybe I've been on two in my entire life. Um, but it's been, I would say for the most part, it's been really wonderful in that I've been able to reconnect with my kids and my husband in ways
Mm.
that I really wasn't before. Just being able to kind of sit with them and just talk and help them with their lessons and just slow down. I'm an introverted person anyways, so being at home is not something that makes me feel stifled. It's
Mm.
actually quite comforting. And so when a lot of people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're going to have to be at home." I'm like, "Okay, this is kind of what I would be doing
Really?
anyways." Yeah. So in that sense, it's been really refreshing. And even with Ramadan coming, it's just been a time to kind of center, to reevaluate a lot of the things that I have been doing that I kind of don't realize why I've been doing it, and just to like think and process much more without a lot of the busyness of
Mm.
life. But it's also been challenging because we're in, this space 24/7, and it's like you love your husband, but not that
Sometimes,
much.
yeah, yeah. And what about schooling? Have you had to homeschool the kids or?
Yes. So, as you read in my bio, I teach college English. And I'm realizing that even though I'm an English professor and I love teaching grammar and composition, teaching a 5-year-old how to read is not the same at all. It's very, very challenging. It's a different type of teaching, and
Yeah,
it requires so much patience.
makes
And
sense.
I realized that I'm not cut out for it, but I'm learning how to do it, and that's been one of the actual beautiful things. Like just sitting with my 5-year-old, particularly, and learning how to teach in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I had something very similar because I've got 5 children. So
wow. I'm one of five. Oh my gosh, girl.
I'm one of 5 too, and I said I was never going to do it. I don't know what happened there. We planned 3, and 2 were gifts from God.
Oh
Um,
wow, yeah.
they were gifts from God. But what I was going to say is my youngest is 12, and suddenly I was at home and I was having to homeschool. And I realized how much time and the curriculum has changed. As the time's gone on, the
Mm-hmm.
education curriculum has changed. And suddenly they're learning coding and they're learning, line graphs. And my maths is terrible. And I had to have the phone underneath and I was Googling things because I was thinking, my God, I just don't know how to do this.
Yes, yes,
It was difficult.
yes.
Have you been
Wow.
able to create or write?
No, I have not. It's been
Same.
really challenging because we've had to transition to teaching online. So I teach 5 classes online, which is insane. And then helping to teach my daughters, it's just not enough time in the day, I feel. And by the time that they are settled down, I'm just exhausted mentally and emotionally. So I actually haven't had a lot of time to create. I started a poem about roller skating, and it's still in the draft stages. So I'm hoping to get back to that. But I will have to say that thanks to you, I can say
Ah,
that I wrote a few haikus,
you did.
and those yeah. So I shouldn't say that I haven't created. I have, and actually after that. Those haikus that I sent you, I ended up writing a couple more. Um, I think the form of the haiku was really um, lends itself really well, at least to me, during this time because it's short, it's contained, and it
Mm.
allowed me to kind of pour into a form without feeling like I needed to say a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think that's the case for so many people. Once I'd invited people to write those haikus, and yours were wonderful. They're going in a poetry film.
Oh, thank you.
Once we invited people to write, there were people that were sending haikus in that had never wrote poetry before. So I think it
Wow.
lends itself to, I think the succinctness of it. Like it's like a
Hmm.
tweet, and that feels
Yeah.
doable in this
Hmm.
time. It's doable. Anything else just feels too much. And I often
Right.
think that our creating has also taken on a different shape. Now we are, in this remote environment, working remotely. What does it now mean for us to create art or to be
Mm-hmm.
intimate with each other? In the
Right.
name of art. Everyone's discipline is changing in a way, and we're all learning that on the way. I'm still trying to get my head around that.
Right.
And
So have
for me, I didn't write poetry either. I started doing these Insta live sessions, which actually created art without me even realizing. Had it been given to
mm-hmm.
me as a project, I would have overthought it and become
Mm-hmm.
anxious. But this happened so organically.
Yeah, and I was talking to someone yesterday about forcing things and letting things kind of flow freely, like this connection between body and spirit is a very natural one. And yet, when we throw the mind in there, it gets kind of out of whack, and it gets so overdetermined because the mind is trying to process and trying to put it into certain, you know. Um, Make it look a certain way. And I think during this time of quarantine, it's kind of just like, we're in this liminal space. We're
Yeah.
kind of just here to kind of exist and breathe and let flow what needs to flow
I
sometimes.
think Neil
So,
Gaiman put that as we're in this space where we're between the inhale and the exhale, and we're just waiting.
mm, like kind of holding the breath a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah.
So how
How
and
have you
when?
noticed?
Oh, sorry, go
Oh,
on.
no, I was just gonna say, I'm curious, like, how have you noticed your creative process, like, has changed? Like, have your poems, like, were you writing haikus at all alongside the
No,
Instagram?
yeah, no, I started writing haikus after everybody else started writing haikus, and I couldn't write at all for the first couple of weeks of lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
I got into this very numb state, and it
Mm-hmm.
was this heightened anxiety that there was this imminent danger around the corner that we can't see.
Yes.
And I want to keep my loved ones safe. I want to keep my children safe. How do I sit my 24-year-old daughter at home and say, you're not allowed to go out? You know,
Right.
only for her to sit in front of me and say, I'm a 24-year-old woman, I'm a medic, this is what I've studied for. Are you going to sit me at home every time there's a pandemic? And my
Wow.
heart is saying, of course I'm going to, you know. But I knew that no, you're not. No, you're not going to sit her at home. You are absolutely, invested in this career that she's chosen. She wants to do it. This is her social responsibility. She wants to do it, and she has been. And that, I think, for the first couple of weeks, trying to get my head around that was very difficult, very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, what can I do? And I just thought, let me read into the void. So I started reading into this void, whether anybody was going to listen or not. I just thought to myself, I know what it's like to feel isolated or to feel on your own. And I didn't want anybody else to feel like that. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought, I'm going to read into the void. And I didn't know how that void was going to answer back.
Wow.
And it's led me to these beautiful encounters, you being one of them.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like kind of like from what I'm hearing, it's like this push and pull of being like what we feel like we should do versus what we like are being called to do to some
Yeah.
degree, which might be not what the mind tells us needs to happen. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting because even I had like these projects that I wanted to do and like the initial poem that I wanted to finish, and it,
Yeah.
it made me think maybe it's not time for that poem
Right.
to be birthed. Maybe I need to sit back a little bit and focus on something else. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's having faith in the surprise.
Mm,
And we don't know what God's plan is, for us, but somehow something else bursts forth, something we haven't even planned,
right.
and I think it's all part of this waiting process, in between these breaths, just this
Hmm.
waiting and what happens, you know.
Yeah, it's almost wow. When you just said that, it made me think, like, to what degree is this kind of like a line break, like in a poem in many ways, right?
Yeah,
So, like,
yeah,
waiting for the next line is just like we're just on the cliff, right? And just wanting to come to the next line. And maybe the poem is saying slow down, don't read me so fast, right?
Yeah.
You're wanting this rhythm, this quick tempo, and like
You
I
just
just
wrote a
wanted to
poem, Aisha. You just wrote a poem. Everybody just heard that here on Festival in My House. Aisha's just done that live.
Well, it's really based upon something that you said, like the waiting, right? The
Yeah.
breath. Because in many ways, poetry is about breath. Because I taught a creative writing course this semester, which was so hard to do online. Um, yeah, and in one of the genres that we talked about, it's a multi-genre course, and one of them was a poetry, and the question is, what's the difference between poetry and prose? And so the discussion always comes back to like the breath and the auditory aspect of poetry versus prose. Not that you can't read prose aloud and that it can't have those auditory qualities, but that's very central to poetry, and just the aspect of breath and reading and pacing. I think our society, in many ways, we're so focused on doing things, getting things done, the next thing and the next thing. And so maybe it is kind of like the poem writing process of just waiting and hearing and doing what the poem wants you to do, what life
Just
is
being
telling
in
you.
being in that present moment and waiting for that muse,
Yeah,
waiting for the muse or the inspiration to come.
right.
How and when did your poetry journey begin?
Oh, I would say when I was a kid, maybe in middle school. I don't know what the equivalent of that would be. Maybe when I was 12, 13 years old. I would write lots of nature poems
Yeah.
about water and birds, like little things like that. And then I
That
just
sounds
started.
healthy.
It did, it was very positive. Um, I remember my mother, she took one of my poems that I had written about a rat being in my backpack. And the
Oh,
title of the poem was There's a Rat in My Backpack. And
I
she,
love these long titles you've got going on. You're inspiring me.
yeah, and I'm really bad with titles. And so I was just like, what is this
I
poem
love
about?
it.
Oh, it's a rat in my backpack. And she and
Brilliant.
she sent it into our local newspaper and had it published in like the kids section. And I think
Amazing.
that was the beginning of me realizing, oh, okay, like I could see my work in print, and there's a space for that. And so from there, I just started to do more writing and taking creative writing classes in college and on to grad school. And I just loved it as a way to release and to process. Yeah.
So you and I are both fellows, and we're supported by organisations dedicated to our artistic and professional journey. I'm a Joward Compton Poetry Fellow, and you are a Cave Canem Fellow.
Fellow, yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, Cave Canem is an organization. It's started by two poets, African American poets, Toy Derricott and Cornelius Eady. About 22, 23, 22 maybe years ago. And it's for the supporting and just the dissemination of poetry by African Americans. I think it was started because, like in a lot of creative writing programs, there weren't a lot of spaces for Black voices. And when Black poets would share their work, it was often misunderstood or just ripped apart in ways by viewers or readers that just really didn't understand Black culture. And so the organization was started to give these writers a space to share their work. And so every year there's a retreat where if you apply and if you get accepted, you come and you're just around other Black writers, just sharing, and you're writing a poem a week and you're workshopping it. And it's just an amazing experience to see and integrate yourself with all of these other writers from all around the world, actually. It's dynamic. Yeah.
So did you have to apply for that, and then you were accepted on the program?
Yeah, and it's a very competitive one
I
because
was
most
going to
people
say,
don't.
yeah, I can imagine it
Yeah,
being really
most
competitive.
Yeah, and it's limited, and most people don't get accepted. Sometimes people apply 3, 4, 5 times before they get in. It's rare that people get in the first time, and it's a 3-year process. So you can
Mm.
go, consecutively or break it up over like maybe 5 years, and then you kind of graduate. And I've my last year was, I think, in 2015 or 16, one of those years. And so you're always a fellow, and you can do work on behalf of the organization, do readings, to just share your work. And there's other things that the organization does. They host poetry readings, poetry workshops,
Some of
and
those.
contests too. So
So do you remember the feeling of that precise moment when you found out that you were accepted on there? Do you remember what it
yeah,
was?
I think I was at my job, and I was like, "Oh, yes, great. I did it. Like, this is great," because there are so many other people that I had known who had told me about it. It was just kind of word of mouth.
Yeah.
And a couple of fellow poets in my graduate program had mentioned it, and they said, "Oh yeah, you got to apply. It's
Mhm.
phenomenal, blah blah blah. We're in it, blah blah blah." And so when I finally got in, I was like, "Oh, wow, like now I'll finally get to know what it's like to be a part of this type of community." Because in my undergraduate, I was the only Black person in my program. And in
Right.
undergrad, I was one of 2 Black poets. So it was exciting because I felt like I was finally going to have community.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
I can relate to that as well. That community and those conversations that you have with other writers, that's priceless. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize, because my journey into poetry was all a bit topsy turvy. I had my children first.
Okay.
Um, so I had, at one point in my life, I think I had 4 children under the age of 5. So I
My
spent,
goodness.
yeah, I know, I should have got TV. And
You
then,
are doing it. You look so fabulous. I'm so sorry. And I know I
I
shouldn't
love
say that
you, Aisha.
because,
Thank you so much.
well, the
It's just this
assumption is
light.
that,
It fits on purpose in this light.
no, and it's also your eyebrows too. Um,
Thanks. Yes, I've been working on this in this time.
it's
But
great.
I remember that I decided to do my undergrad and my master's with kids. And to be honest, Aisha, I don't remember so much stuff. I really don't.
Yeah.
And I feel like um, sometimes I'm right at the bottom of this ladder of learning. And it's a beautiful place to be. Um, and there's such richness out there that I feel I've still yet to discover. So when I had no idea that I would land this Jerwood Compton Poetry Fellowship, not at all. I applied for it and I got through one round. I think about 200 poets, very established poets as well, had
Wow.
applied. And I think there was about 200 of us to start with, and then they started shortlisting it. And even by the time I got to the shortlist, I still had this voice in my head saying, "It's all right that you got this far. It's brilliant you got
Hmm.
this far. This is great." And I, at that point, just thought to myself, I'm going to pat myself on the back that Alhamdulillah I've got this far. And when I
Hmm.
got that call, I cannot tell you. I just remember thinking, because I had done the interview as well. You had to do an interview, and I remember I was in a hotel room. I was doing the interview off Skype on my little phone. I wasn't even in my own country. I was in Ireland on a project somewhere. And for the first 15 minutes, I babbled. I absolutely babbled to the point where I thought to myself, you know what? Oh, Hafsa, please just be quiet. Honestly, just shush. And six people sat in front of me on this panel. And I just remember holding my breath, stopping. And I remember saying, I'm really nervous. I never do
Wow.
this. I've never done a panel interview. And everyone went, "Oh, babe, it's okay. It's all right." And that made me even more emotional. And I thought, "Oh my God, don't cry, don't cry. You have to get through this interview, get through this interview, get through this interview." So I came out of there thinking, "You've not got it, but it's okay." So when I got that phone call to say, "Actually, you have got it," I was like, "Oh, no way," and just started crying. And I realized then it's such a big affirmation, I guess. I've spent so long with imposter syndrome, thinking
Mm.
suddenly someone's going to come and knock on my door and say, you can't call yourself a poet.
Wow.
You know, who said you could call yourself a poet? I felt for the first time that I've arrived, and it's opened up this community that you're saying. It's opened up this community that I felt I lacked, you know, up till now. I mean, I had wonderful writing groups, and you know, I'd go to writing workshops, and they've been brilliant. Like Common Word and Manchester Muslim Writers have been absolutely brilliant, and I'm part of the Poetry Exchange, and that's widened my knowledge of what's out there. But yeah, I'll always remember. That's why I thought that I have to ask you that question. Where were you, and what was that feeling when you first knew that you had become that fellow and be accepted?
Yeah, I mean, that idea of imposter syndrome is really interesting that you mentioned, because there were and are still so many fabulous poets who have been accepted into Cave Canem, and even just the directors. These are people whose work I studied in undergraduate, and I'm just like, now I'm going to be like in the same room with these people. Oh my gosh. And we have to write a poem a day. How in the world am I going to do this? Like, and it's going to be critiqued. Like, I'm not good enough at all. I just was really, really freaking out. I mean, it was like this mix of jubilation to have the community, but then also a mix of, I'm really nervous, pressure, to perform. So much so that I almost I think I cheated, and I kind of drafted a couple poems beforehand just in case I didn't get the inspiration. Because the premise is that the poems should be stuff that comes to you naturally each day, not stuff that you have worked on before. And so I was just nervous, but that imposter syndrome, I'm not good enough. I don't, have a book out. Some of these people had books out already, and I just didn't think that I was going to cut it. But I think going through the process and having people kind of like what you were saying when you did the interview, and them saying, it's okay, receive that affirmation. I think I received it every day that I was there, and made me feel really good too. Yeah. That this, I belong.
Yeah. What prompts you to write? What inspires you? Do you wait for the muse, or what do you do? What's your writing process?
I think I do. I know a lot of people have much more regimented processes, and I even teach students about, sitting down and doing specific writing exercises, which I do, but I find most of my poems are things that are sparked by just me coming up with a line. Like if I'm at the grocery store and a line just hits me, I'll write it down on, a piece of paper that I have, or if I notice something, or if a memory sometimes comes from dreams even.
Yes.
At this really interesting dream about Michael Jackson. I'm obsessed with Michael Jackson, so we can talk about him.
All of them.
Yeah. Once I had a dream about Michael Jackson, and it turned into a poem. So just anything that hits me, a lot of times it's really random, which sometimes means that my writing process isn't as consistent as I would like it to be. But again, when I find that I have a more regimented writing schedule, the stuff that comes out isn't as organic. So
I agree. I actually find that harder to do. Commissioned poetry, I always find harder I feel like I need more time to absorb what it is what the ask is. But if it's something that I see an image, or there's a word, or there's a dream, and I can put that away as a seedling, and I know it will grow into something. And sometimes that can be instant. And those are much easier for me than the ones that I have to really sit and work on.
Right. Yeah, the pressure, of just feeling like this is a poem someone wants, rather than a poem that was wanting to be birthed itself. Yeah, that's.
Yes.
So do you do a lot of commissioned poems?
I have been asked to do. I had to do one last year when I was a writers in residence for Manchester Literature Festival. So I had to spend time in a specific area, Longsight area. And it wasn't an area that was local to me, but it felt like such a huge responsibility.
Mm.
And there was another writer as well with me. He's called Isaiah Hull. He's absolutely brilliant. And he also was feeling this pressure. And I remember he's younger than me, and he's so gifted and talented. And I remember saying to him that in order to convince myself, I remember saying to him that all we are doing is gifting Longsight's people back to its people. We're gifting its stories back to them. And the minute that went into my head, I felt like I could do it. But I definitely needed
Okay.
more. I needed that stretch of 3 to 6 months to absorb those stories and to talk to people and to, sit at the bus stops and, go and eat in that area, talk to the people in the libraries for me to do something that I knew would honor that, what I was being asked to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a process. I don't do a lot of commissioned poems, but a friend of mine does. And I think people underestimate the work that it
Oh,
takes
yeah, it's
to
hard.
just to write a poem. Yeah, a lot of research is involved. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I try and shy away from
poetry is
them, to be
work.
honest.
Yeah,
Poetry is.
I can see why.
So I invited you to bring poems that have been friends to you. And I love this
Yeah.
concept of poems as friends. And I came across that working as a associate at the Poetry Exchange, who I mentioned before. And they have these intimate conversations where they invite people who are not necessarily poets themselves. They're readers, they're people that love literature. And they invite them to bring their poem as a friend. And you can listen to these podcasts. They're online at the Poetry Exchange. And my particular one that I brought to them was On Children by Khalil Gibran. So, what have you brought today as your friend?
Um, okay, so I bought um book of poems, Carl Phillips's Double Shadow, and
Mm-hmm.
some poems out of there. And it's a book of poems that I feel it just really spoke to me because one of the things that I love about Carl Phillips is his ability to ask questions that are so big, but still like hit you in a very specific way. Like it just kind of makes you feel like you're in the middle of the decision making process or just the mind. So I'll read one of the poems. So is that cool? Like we read
Yes,
the
please.
poems, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's called The Heat of the Sun. Calming the bell was nothing easy, nor did the calmness after make the air surrounding it, though at first it had seemed to, any more still or clear. The usual clouds building up into shapes I almost recognized, and then letting go of them. Customs like the breaking in two of willow branches, which maybe still stands for parting somewhere. Maybe the mistake of hoping never to make mistakes is the only pattern we get to leave behind us. No bells, just a calmness after. The air so clear, we forget what hurt so much, and in forgetting, think it's disappeared. So, um, I was reading through this book yesterday, and that poem just leaped out to me, especially the lines of, maybe the mistake of hoping to never make mistakes is the biggest issue in our lives, right? Which really speaks to me because I'm a quasi perfectionist and I really kind of overthink things. And so, like, hoping to never make a mistake, can hold us back, right?
It can cripple you.
And the poem is, yeah, it can, you just overdo things and it's like creates anxiety. Um, and so the poem ends with just saying, maybe that's the thing we need to break. And I just think about the quarantine and how it's forcing us to hold the breath. And so maybe it's allowing us to let go of bad patterns to so much to where we forget that we even had that desire to never make mistakes. So the poem just really speaks to me on a personal level when it comes to some of the things that I I'm learning about myself. Yeah.
And I think that's what this quarantine's doing for everyone, isn't it? We can't go outwards, so everybody has to take that journey. And
yeah,
the poem that I bought to share with you, the poem that I bought as my friend, speaks to that, I think, as well. It lends itself quite nicely to and follows what you've shared with us, and it's a Derek Walcott's poem, and it's called Love After Love. And this is a really personal poem for me as well, because my poetry book, The Cellox and the Clot, actually was published in the same month that I had left a 25-year marriage. And that decision had been one of the most hardest of my life, if not the hardest of my life, and took a lot of thought. And it's one that I'm still getting, I'm going through that process. And this poem really comforted me during that time of real troublement, actually, because once I had made that decision, there were so many other people invested in this marriage. I lost family on both sides for a little while. Some of them I never retrieved. And this poem gave me comfort when I had to start again. And so I came to this home and had to meet myself for the first time. And this poem I absolutely love, and I'd love to share it with you now. And it's called Love After Love.
Yeah.
The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life.
Wow. I love that poem.
I love it. Honestly, I can't tell you how much comfort it brought me when you're in a difficult relationship and you question yourself so much and you overthink yourself. And really, the poem speaks to that very simple idea of just, in order to be able to learn to love other people, you need to be able to love yourself,
Right.
Meeting ourselves, in this quarantine, spending so much time with ourselves, I felt that once I was not in relation to anybody else, who am I?
Right.
I had to ask this question of myself. I'd spent so many years, being someone's daughter, being someone's daughter-in-law, being someone's mother, being someone's wife, being someone's sister. And I had to ask myself, who am I when I'm not in relation to everybody else? And I felt like I had lost that.
Right.
So this poem serves as a reminder to me, and it reminds me of how much I've grown. My younger days were very much spent, looking to others for approval and looking to others for love. And now it's so calming for me to not have to have that kind of, not feed that incessant need,
Right.
And just that last two lines are so sparse. They're just asking you to sit and feast on your life. And we forget all the, like you were saying before, you said it earlier, that, we're in this rush to get to the next stage and not sit with and celebrate where we are right now and what it's taken to get us here.
Yeah. And that last line, oh man, I'm assuming there's like a line break before feast or maybe something like that. I don't know how it looks on the page, but it just, that the idea of your life being a celebratory meal is something that I don't think a lot of people would consider, like that you would eat your life. But it's really just about enjoying it, right? Because it is kind of like nourishment, right? Wow, I have to get that poem, right? It's Love After Love, you said, is the title?
Love After Love, yeah, by Derek Walcott. Well, we're in touch now. We've become family.
Yeah.
Um, so, this sistership is going to continue. We'll be sharing all sorts of resources.
Inshallah.
But the
Yes.
other, inshallah, but the other P word that I wanted to bring into this conversation was that we're both parents. So has that
Yes.
experience of motherhood had an impact on your writing in any way? Whether that's, having time to write, whether that's the content?
Um, it has softened me. Um,
Mhm.
I sometimes put up a really hard exterior, especially when it comes to parenting. Like, I think I'm kind of like the disciplinarian one. Um, and I think sometimes it's a little too much, and I think I've been softened a little bit, just with the quarantine. But I think poetry, has I've written a few poems about parenthood in my book, and I found myself being kind of all mushy and gushy in those poems, which is weird because I normally don't express that verbally.
To the
And I
children.
think, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about that, especially yesterday, and just what it is that keeps me from doing that, and um, I think poetry has kind of helped me to pull out some of the more buried and hidden connection. Because even during the quarantine, I found myself even more physically interactive with my children, like giving them much more hugs and cuddling with them when they first wake up, and just doing a lot of more physical types of connections than I normally do. And I'm like, why was I doing this before? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a learning curve for all of us. It really is. And there is something about being vulnerable in front of your children. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Going through what I went through, I remember when they were younger, I had to be this very stoic figure because I had to protect them. But actually, in that protection, what I wasn't teaching them was that it's okay to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that when I showed that sign, it
Mm.
it it almost gave them permission to see all the sides of what it means to be human.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
needed them to see that. I needed them to see that actually beyond the mother, there's a human being, that cries,
Mm-hmm.
if like this happens, or, she's in pain, or she's joyful with lots of laughter. They need to see all of those facets.
They do, and it's surprising how much love and comfort that children can give back to you. You
Yes.
think that, oh, they won't understand, they won't be able to process, so I need to just do this in private. But oh my goodness, kid you not, yesterday I was
Yeah.
in my daughter's, if you can, I don't know if you can see in the background, there's a princess castle. And
Right.
we were in the princess castle reading, and I just started to tear up. And my 5-year-old was like, "It's okay, mommy. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay." And just their instinctual ability to comfort and
Yeah.
um, say everything's going to be fine. They didn't have to go
Yeah.
into the details, but just that kind of innocent optimism that kids have
Mm.
keeps them, I think, going better to some degree than most adults. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a resilience. Um,
Hmm.
as an ode to all other P words, I wanted to ask you if you'd heard of the English word plonker.
Plunker.
Plonker,
I feel
yeah.
like I have. Plunker?
It means it means foolish or inept person, or a person with little or no knowledge. And we've had
Oh,
really poor leadership in both of our countries. Ours, in particular,
oh,
encouraging herd immunity during this pandemic. And ours has been so bad that there's talk of having inquiries as to the way that the pandemic was handled. And our COVID-19 death toll, I think, topped Europe. We're on 33,000, I think, and you're nearing
wow.
85,000. Does it worry you the way our governments have been handling this pandemic? And if so, how are you dealing with that? And maybe we can come up
It
with an appropriate keyword for both of our leaders off air.
yes. Um, yeah, it does worry me. I mean, it's no surprise that our leader, is just I think if I was to say anything, it would just be like too raw to be aired. But I think it was mishandled from the very beginning, and I think there's reports out now that there were pieces of information given to the government back in January that was essentially offering support when it came to medical supplies, and our government kind of, passed it off and denied, didn't take them up. And apparently the Obama administration had written a 69-page book on how to deal with something like this. And when the Trump administration...
Yeah, we had something very similar back. We had something very similar, a trial back in 2015, and the findings of that report were buried. And in that, it was evident that we would not be able to cope as a country, that there wouldn't be enough beds, that there wouldn't be enough ventilators, that that the PPE was inadequate. But it was buried. It sounds the same as that's been happening with the USA.
Very much so. Even the Trump administration sliced the budget of the CDC, the organization that handles disease control. They laid off a lot of people and cut programming that was specifically put in place by the Obama administration. Why they did that, I mean, there's different theories, this kind of desire that Trump has to kind of get back at Obama. But it's just been very, very troubling. And even within my own municipality, the quarantines have now have been lifted. They're being lifted slowly, but they were lifted this week to where now people can go back to doing some of their activities. I even think that in 2 weeks, once June hits, it'll be completely lifted to where people can now almost go back to movie theaters, cinemas, and go to restaurants in June. Yeah. Which is very, very troubling. And it just makes me very, very nervous about just being out now, because the more you have people interacting in these communal spaces, there's already reports that cases have gone up just within the last 2 weeks. So
and I think it's even more scary, the facts of how, it's affecting more Black and ethnic minority. We're having a lot more of those deaths, even though we make up a small percentage of the country.
Yes.
Even those, they're so worrying. There was a point where even at the beginning of this pandemic, 1 in 4 British people were Muslim.
Wow.
And we only make up 5% of this country. So there's a real fear. There's a real fear of why that's happening, and how, much more study needs to be done as to why we're more likely to end up dying than our white counterparts,
Yeah, there's been a lot of articles that have been passed around on social media, and how Blacks in this country have always been at the bottom when it comes to health, access to health. And even I was actually reading an article yesterday, which actually made me very, very sad. And the indigenous people, specifically the Navajo, the Native Americans, have actually been hit the hardest, worse than African Americans, to the degree that I think I can't remember which Navajo tribe, but just hundreds of people on the reservations. The reservations are in many ways underfunded anyways, and are very poor and impoverished people. And so the culture of the Navajo people it's very communal. And so they're saying isolate, which goes against the culture, but it also says don't go out and get, supplies, but yet they're already isolated hours outside of the closest grocery store. So it's a bigger conversation about accessibility, food deserts where you...
Yeah, the link between death and deprivation, the links between death and deprivation, in deprived areas is very, very frightening, actually.
Very much so, and I think this is the time where these conversations need to happen about the link between race, geography, healthcare, um, and just humanity. Like all of these things intertwine, and we can no longer think about healthcare as this separate entity that's divorced from race. You just
Yeah,
can't, because
absolutely.
a lot of the people who are recovering in America are white, middle
Mm,
class and upper class individuals. It's also an aspect of class too.
yeah,
So,
yeah, and it's the same here as well. And in that, have you seen community organizing and coming together? Because there's been this real drive here, people just not waiting for the government. I've
mm,
seen such generosity from the general public, who've become activated as they do in times of trouble. This is not new for us, and they're, buying food supplies for the vulnerable and isolated. They, dishing out healthcare packs without waiting for the government. They're giving mental health support in amongst their
hmm.
communities. Is the same thing over there?
I think so. I think that I've heard more about it, and I saw it more in action towards the beginning and middle of the
Mm,
quarantine, perhaps not so much. And that could just be me kind of not being as active on social
yeah.
media during Ramadan. But
Mm,
there have been a lot of we call them food pantries here, where people
yeah.
can just, every other week get food in
Mm,
packages. And so even through the quarantine, it's being pushed even more because some people may not necessarily have access to grocery stores. And so how can you self-isolate and still have food
mm,
if the nearest grocery store is an hour away or 45 minutes? So I've seen a lot of that. And I've also seen a lot of dissemination of information that if you needed like mental health support, especially for
mhm,
students from the
mm,
academic um, side of things, I've noticed that my school has really pushed counseling services for students
yeah,
and financial
yeah.
services, because a lot of the students
Mm,
at my college, they study, but they also work to
mhm,
fund their studies. And so they a lot of students have dropped out because they
mm,
have to go to work, but the going to work increases anxiety. So um, there's been a push to help with that type of emotional and psychological support too. Yeah.
mm. I could sit here and chat to you forever. I feel like our time is just not enough. And
Yeah.
I wanted to just quickly say that you did send me some haikus that are going to be included in the Greater Manchester Creative Commission poetry film. And your haiku, you said, "This Ramadan feels like an arc waiting on me to give up and board."
Mm-hmm.
How has Ramadan been for you?
It's been very freeing in the sense
Mm,
of pushing me to let go. So like in that haiku, like my intention was like seeing this boat, right? Like with Noah,
mm,
like saying, hey, stop trying. Stop trying to float. Stop trying to swim. You just stop trying to get all these life jackets on. Just get on the daggone boat, okay?
yeah.
Because it's a losing battle in some respects, what Noah was fighting, and a lot of the people
Mm,
in Noah's time. And so it's not a giving up in many ways. It's sometimes recognizing that this is not your fight. And so
mm,
for me personally, as someone who is very type A sometimes and who tries really hard to get the mind to wrap around things, Ramadan has come to basically say, it's okay, stop trying, you know,
mm.
just
You've
wait
got
for the next line break.
wait for the next line break. That's lovely. Do you
Yeah.
have a poem that you can share with us before we have to end our time together?
Sure. I was um I was gonna do one about my daughter. I'm gonna do one about my daughter since we talked a lot about
Please.
parenthood. Yeah, and
Yes.
before my daughter was born, I noticed that I wasn't praying a lot as much as I had, and it was just I couldn't really figure out what it was. And so I was very distant spiritually. And so after she was born, I started noticing little things that she would do that would make me conscious of prayer. And so this is a poem from my book entitled When Your Daughter Pulls You to Prayer. When your daughter pulls you to prayer, you pray. Let her grab your hand like you do hers. Let her lead you away from bills and tests and texts and into submission. Web her chubby little fingers through yours as you step downstairs, one by one, over sippy cups and blocks, past spilled cereal and muddied socks, to reach that quiet space where you once retreated when your faith was young, uncluttered, and easy. You've since closed those doors. How can you return with your depression, failed ventures, gained weight, hands shaking? How can you stand to hear your voice tremble? But your daughter is leading you. You cannot run from this. Let her pull those blue scarves lying on the edge of the desk. Help her drape hers as you drape yours. This is mothering. Stand by her side when she cups her jelly-covered hands like you saw your mother do yours. Life has not broken you. Smile. What a blessing memory is. Precise as her hands folded over each other. Remember, your mother showed you prayer, how to bend and rise, fall to your knees. Alhamdulillah. This is how you learned your body can be a vessel of gratitude. Your daughter is learning hers now. Let her crawl onto your back as you place your head to the floor. Subhanallah. Listen to her giggle, jumbled words you once uttered. Let them stir up verses you forgot, that you let sit dormant, a potted plant, wilted in shadow. Rise. What made you forget the strength of your legs to pull you back up after falling? Raise your hands to ears, summon the words you always silence. Allahu Akbar. Smile, bend your toes, feel your spirit spread like ivy. Know that she sees you come back, your hands hugged under your breast. This is what daughters do. They remind you of yourself. So, little poem there.
Beautiful poem. That actually made me feel really emotional.
Oh, yeah. It was very emotional to write. Yeah.
It's beautiful. And for those listening, I have Aisha's book here. It's called To Keep From Undressing by Aisha Sharif. You should definitely have this on your bookshelf. And I have honored this book in wearing the same clothes and the same color. The color scheme matches. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for this wonderful exchange. And I pray that we come through these turbulent times with less fear and more love and more humanity, with much more open hearts. And inshallah, that you and I get to meet properly one day.
Yes, I was just thinking I've got to find a way to get her to the States. I just love your positivity, your, diligence in doing these sessions every day. I am so humbled that you even were willing to share my work. I'm very, very humbled.
Yeah. Honor, and I believe that nothing is by accident. Yeah. Nothing is by accident. Everything is pre-planned, and we were meant to do this. We were meant to do this, and may our love of poetry keep us and many others connected, and may his hand be over ours always.
Always, inshallah. Always. Yes.
Take care of yourself. It's been so lovely, and inshallah, this will be the first of many conversations.
For sure. Thank you so much. Yeah. Stay safe.
And you.